My scripture today is from Matthew 23, verses 34 through 40. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees with his reply, they thought up a fresh question of their own to ask him. One of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap him with the question, "Teacher, which is the most important commandment?" Which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, and I don't think he even had to think about this, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. All other commandments and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments." Bless us through the reading of his word. Did you hear what Jesus said? Love. That little four-letter word is the most important commandment out there, isn't it? Love God first and then love your neighbor. What does that mean in a world today that is so divided that a lot of times we can't even talk to each other? Well, WIBW-TV carries a series called Good Kids. And I don't know whether it's weekly or just when they find something that they really think meets the criteria or what, but they have a short segment on some kids throughout this area of what they're doing. A short list of those segments is Clifton Clyde Good Kids, proud of their 2016 Pink and Green project to help a beloved teacher. Good Kids serves lemonade to aid those who served in the military. Good Kids Savannah makes homemade thank you cards for police and deputies. Good Kids Teens turn rivalry into help for Jefferson County Food Bank. But I think my favorite of the ones that I've seen in the last few years was this one. The title of it was Good Kids Rally to Help a Neighbor After Fire in Seneca. And the story goes like this. When fire struck a home in Seneca, a group of good kids jumped into action. Fire broke out July 27, 2015 in the Bill Osterhouse home. It was contained to one room, but smoke did damage throughout the house. A group of young people who live in Bill's neighborhood wanted to help him out. Kinsey, Cooper, Kirsten, Peyton, Dalton, Austin, Levi, Trent, Lucas, and Randy opened a lemonade and cookie stand. They opened it the day after the fire and kept it open for 2 days. The group advertised their efforts on Facebook and with traditional signs in the neighborhood, along with word of mouth. They even got themselves one of those microphones that you can, blast out like the auctioneers use, and they would holler at cars as they were going by to try to get them to stop. They ended up raising $1,400 for Bill. It ends with WIBW News 13 salutes these good kids for their efforts and hope that they will have a great school year. Jesus' commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. And the second one is to love your neighbor as yourself. These kids did exactly that. It was simple for them because they didn't do what us adults do. They didn't ask, does he deserve the help? They didn't ask, what religion is he? They didn't ask, what country is he from? They didn't ask, is he legal or illegal here? They didn't ask what ethnicity he was or what political party he was part of. You see, us adults, we let things that really don't matter get in the way. No, these kids, they just jumped in and did something that was meaningful. But these commandments really are a lot bigger than doing something that's just going to help a little piece like that. Yes, that is a part of it and a big part of it, but they're bigger than that. You see, Jesus told us to love the Lord our God first and foremost. And so I thought I would look at what was his example. How did he do that? Well, his mom and dad had gone to a festival in Jerusalem with all the kids. And then when they left, he wasn't with them, was he? At 12 years old, when they finally found him sitting in the temple, learning and listening to the elders and the others in the Jewish religion, Mom and Dad asked, why did you not come with us? He says, don't you know I've got to be out my Father's business? He knew that loving God took some study, took some time. But then, a few years later, where does he show up? At this muddy, nasty Jordan River with this wild-eyed wild man in goat skins and whatever else, eating locusts and who knows what, to be baptized. This guy named John. I'm reasonably sure that's not where I would want to be baptized. I've seen pictures of this place, and it's not, there's creeks and cow pastures that are cleaner than this river is. Probably, but he showed up because that was showing his love for God. But then he goes out into the wilderness for 40 days. No food. He's probably got some water somewhere because you can't go 40 days without water. It just doesn't work that way. You can go 40 days without food. But on the way out, who's there to greet him? It's the devil. He's there to greet him and say, hey, Jesus, all you got to do, turn those rocks into bread. Right? All you got to do is that. No problem. You can be fed. Well, when Jesus turned that down, he says, hey, come with me. I'll show you all the places that you can have that if you'll just worship me, you can be ruler of all these places. You can be famous. Well, that didn't work. He took him to the top of the pinnacle on the temple and said, hey, if you just jump, the angels will catch you. No problem. And Jesus didn't. He knew what he was here for. It was to worship God. It was to be God's servant. And doing what the devil was asking him to do was not going to do that. But I'll tell you what, after 40 days of being out there with no food, I might have ate those rocks without even turning them to bread. Jesus had power that made it so he could understand what he was doing. But Jesus knew there was more than that. You see, he says there's that second part of it, to love your neighbor. Right? Love your neighbor as yourself. And you see, he was a wandering preacher. This guy was homeless. He wasn't living in a mansion somewhere. He wasn't eating the fanciest foods. He was homeless. He was walking around the country preaching. And what did he do? When these lepers said, hey, can you help us? He did. When the blind man needed to be able to see, he helped him. When the lame man needed to be able to walk, he helped him. When the mom whose daughter was possessed, He drove them out without even seeing the daughter. Jesus took the time to show us what love means. Because you see, those were all people that were not allowed into the temple. Those were people that couldn't even get close to the front door. And yet Jesus helped them. One of them was even a foreigner in the country without the right papers. And he helped them. Isn't that strange? Well, it shouldn't be. When Jesus said that the second greatest commandment is to love the neighbor as yourself, he wasn't just talking to that crowd. He was talking to us too. Brian McLaren, in his book, The Great Spiritual Migration, and if you've never read that book, it's one I wholeheartedly endorse as one that you ought to read, because he's got some ideas in there that are fantastic. And I think if we start looking at some of them, we're going to see some real growth in the Christian church. You see, he suggests that we spend way too much time on policies and procedures and board meetings and cabinet meetings and all these other things, and we have this list of, if you believe this, 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 and this, you're a Christian. Well, you know what? Jesus didn't have any of that. He didn't want any of that. Jesus said, love is it. That's all you got to have to be here. He took the time to point out, and in his book, McLaren tells us that we've got to get back to that. He's not advocating for a new church. He's advocating that the churches that are here right now take a look at what's going on and say, it's time to get back to where Jesus was at. It's time to forget about all this policy, all of this, what you've got to believe to be here, and get back to who is it out there that needs help? Who is it that needs our love? Who is it that we can show what we're doing? You see, I like the church that I go to in Topeka. It's a big congregation. On a normal Sunday morning, we'll have close to 300 people there. We can be involved in a lot of things. We're involved in Doorstep and Let's Help and Rescue Mission and, I don't know, a myriad of other things. We found out here a few years ago that the Rescue Mission, which is the homeless shelter there, doesn't feed the people Sunday lunch. So we started taking 150 sandwiches over there with chips and either pudding cups or some other kind of fruit, and making sure that they had something to eat at lunch. We found out that some of the people in town don't understand how to manage their money, and that's a lot of the problem with the poverty. And so a group called Circles was started. It's a national group, but they brought it to Topeka, started at our church to train people how to manage their lives, to help them. But, you know, it's one of those things where they are the leaders. They are the ones that have to decide how far they want to get to. It's not us saying, you've got to do this. It's them leading the way. You know, those would be enough for most churches. But a few months ago, back in, I think it was like February, maybe it might have even been back in January, when they were talking about the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's death and some of those things, and they were talking about what was going on, this group nationally was starting to get together to talk about the Poor People's Campaign. And if you haven't heard of the Poor People's Campaign, what it is it's nonviolent resistance to what's going on out there that's dividing us. It's for fair housing, for fair treatment in the workplace, for fair treatment in anything and everything that you might be involved in. And you see, it's not for somebody to take advantage of somebody else. It's to pull people up so that everybody's on the same level. It's what Martin Luther King wanted for everyone. Didn't matter the color of the skin, didn't matter the social status, it didn't matter anything else. And so this Poor People's Campaign has been going. People have been arrested. We've had some of the people from our church get arrested in nonviolent resistance. And they're going to take this to D.C., I think, sometime in September, if I remember right, but to get to the halls of Congress, to start getting them to understand that where they're at is not where they need to be. You see, over the years, we've moved away from what Jesus wanted. We've moved away from the understanding of what love truly is. Love is not us telling somebody else where they need to be so that they can be like us. Love is taking somebody else by the hand and saying, how can I help you? What can I do to help make your life better? That's where Jesus was at. You see, Jesus didn't tell the lepers what they had to do. He just healed them so their lives were better. He didn't tell the blind man what he had to do. He just healed him. He reached out and pulled them up. And that's what we need to do. But we've got to where we think policy is it. We've got to have this policy that says you've got to believe this, 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 and this. We need to get away from that. We really do. I always like to leave a challenge with the congregation when I end my sermons. My challenge to you today is to think about what is it you're going to do this week, not long term, but just this week, to live out those commandments. What changes do you need to make to do that? Who is it that is totally unlike you that you can go to and say, what can I do to help you? Open hand, open arms. No fist tight with, I've got the strings and you've got to do what I want you to do. It's, what can I do to help you? Amen.